It was 3 in the morning. The candles had burned down to nothing, and the great house on Grosvenor Square was silent as a grave. Cecilia knew that if she were caught, it wouldn't just mean prison, it would mean the gallows. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't invited. She was a ghost in a silk dress. She couldn't afford slipping into the ballroom to steal back the one thing that could save her life. She thought she was alone. She thought she was invisible. But she was wrong. The Duke of Blackwood hadn't gone to bed. He was sitting in the shadows of the gallery, watching her every move. And he wasn't about to call the guards. He had a much darker plan in mind. The floorboards of Stirling Manor were made of ancient oak, seasoned by 200 years of family secrets, yet to Cecilia Vane they felt like eggshells. Every step she took in her satin slippers threatened to crack the silence of the sprawling London estate. It was October 1884. The fog outside was thick enough to chew pressing against the high arched windows of the ballroom, turning the moonlight into a bruised, milky haze. Inside, the air smelled of stale beeswax, dying lilies, and the lingering metallic scent of expensive champagne from the party that had ended hours ago. Cecilia paused by a marble bust of a Roman senator, her breath hitching in her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here. Technically, she wasn't supposed to exist in this world at all anymore. 3 years ago, Cecilia Vane had been the belle of the season, the daughter of a respected earl. Now, she was a seamstress living in a rat-infested boarding house in Whitechapel. A woman erased from society by her father's scandalous suicide and the financial ruin that followed. But tonight, she had to return to the world that had rejected her. She smoothed the skirts of the emerald green gown, a dress she had stitched together herself from scraps discarded by a wealthy client. It fit her perfectly, but it felt like a costume. She scanned the vast, empty ballroom. Her target wasn't the silver on the tables or the jewels left behind. It was the small mahogany writing desk tucked into the alcove near the library entrance. Rumour had it that Alistair Stirling, the Duke of Blackwood, kept his most private correspondence there before moving it to his vault in the morning. And in that stack of correspondence sat a letter written by her father just hours before he died, a letter that proved he hadn't embezzled the regiment's funds, but had been framed by a man who now sat in the House of Lords. Cecilia moved. She crossed the dance floor, the ghostly echo of waltzes playing in her mind. She reached the desk. Her fingers trembled as she pulled a hairpin from her intricate updos. She wasn't a thief by trade, but desperation was a powerful teacher. She jiggled the lock. Click! The drawer slid open with a soft hiss. Cecilia's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She rifled through the papers. Invitations, bills of sale, a deed for a horse. And there it was, the distinctive blue wax seal of the Vane family. Tears pricked her eyes. I found it. She snatched the letter, clutching it to her chest. She turned to leave her mission complete. I wouldn't use that door if I were you. A voice drawled from the darkness above. The latch is rusted. It tends to squeal. Cecilia froze. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. She looked up toward the gallery that overlooked the ballroom, a shadowy balcony usually reserved for musicians. A figure detached itself from the gloom. A man. He was tall, leaning casually against the railing, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. Even in the dim light, the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face were unmistakable. Alistair Stirling, the Duke of Blackwood. He was known in London society as the Frost, not just for his piercing, pale blue eyes, but for his absolute lack of warmth. He was a man who ruined businesses with a signature and broke engagements without a blink. "Your Grace," Cecilia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Keep the voice down, Miss Vane." Alistair said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather and not a felony in progress. "The butler sleeps lightly, and he has a terrible temper." He turned and walked toward the spiral staircase, descending slowly. Every step he took was a hammer blow to Cecilia's composure. She should run. She should bolt for the terrace doors. But her legs refused to move. Alistair reached the bottom of the stairs and walked toward her. He was larger than he appeared in the gossip columns, broad-shouldered, imposing, radiating a terrifying, controlled power. He stopped 3 feet away from her. He smelled of sandalwood and cold rain. "I thought you were dead," he said simply. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded intrigued. "I might as well be," Cecilia replied, her chin lifting instinctively. Even in poverty, she hadn't lost her pride. "If you're going to call the constable, do it now. I won't beg." Alistair took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes scanning her face, then dropping to the letter clutched in her white-knuckled hand. "You broke into my home, bypassed my footman, and picked a lock that cost me 50 guineas to install. And you did it all in a dress that, while lovely, is clearly made from last season's remnants." Cecilia flushed. "The dress is none of your concern. On the contrary, I admire the resourcefulness." He held out his hand, palm up. "Give me the letter." "No." Cecilia stepped back. "It belonged to my father. It proves his innocence." "It proves nothing if you are arrested for burglary." Alistair countered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "Give it to me, Cecilia, or I ring the bell and you spend the rest of your youth in Newgate prison." It was a bluff. It had to be. But looking into his eyes, she saw no mercy. Slowly, with shaking hands, she placed the envelope in his palm. Alistair didn't look at it. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his smoking jacket. "You want this letter?" "It is my life," she said, her voice breaking. "Then you shall have to earn it back." Alistair stepped closer, encroaching on her personal space, until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "I have a problem, Miss Vane, a political problem. My family is pressuring me to marry a woman from the Habsburg line, to secure a trade deal, a match that would be disastrous for my personal freedom. I need a distraction. I need a scandal so potent that no respectable foreign royal would dare marry me." Cecilia stared at him. "What are you saying? I need a fiancé," Alistair said, a cold smile touching his lips. "Someone unsuitable. Someone with a ruined name, but noble blood. Someone desperate enough to agree to a devil's bargain." He leaned down, whispering into her ear. "Pretend to be my future duchess for 3 months. Shock the ton. Make them hate the idea of us. Once the Habsburgs withdraw their offer, I will return your father's letter, and I will give you £5,000 to start a new life, anywhere in Europe." Cecilia's mind reeled. £5,000 was a fortune. The letter was her salvation. But to pretend to love this cold, ruthless man, to step back into the spotlight that had burned her. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Alistair swirled his whiskey. "Then I scream, 'Thief!' and the police will be here in 5 minutes." Cecilia looked at the door, then back at the Duke. She saw the trap closing around her. She had walked into the ballroom a thief, but she was about to leave as something much more dangerous. 3 months, she whispered. Alistair raised his glass in a mock toast. "Welcome to the family, my dear. The carriage ride from Grosvenor Square to Cecilia's squalid lodging in Whitechapel was silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones. Alistair had insisted on escorting her back, claiming that his future Duchess could not be seen hailing a hackney cab at 4:00 a.m. Inside the velvet-lined interior of the Duke's personal carriage, Cecilia sat as far away from him as possible. She watched the city transform through the window, from the clean, gaslit streets of Mayfair to the dark, soot-stained alleys of the East End. "You live here?" Alistair asked, his nose wrinkling slightly as they pulled up to a crumbling brick building with a broken front step. "It is what one can afford when the Crown seizes one's inheritance." "Your Grace," Cecilia said sharply. She reached for the door handle. "Alistair," he corrected. "If we are to convince London we are madly in lust, you cannot call me Your Grace." "I am not in lust with you," she snapped. "I am being blackmailed by you." "Potato, potato," he murmured. "Pack your things. You move into Blackwood House tomorrow. Noon." "I can't just leave," Cecilia protested. "I have obligations." "You mean your job at the textile mill? I bought the mill this morning." Cecilia froze her hand on the latch. She turned to stare at him, horror dawning on her face. "You what?" "I couldn't sleep." Alistair shrugged. "I looked into your background before the party. I knew you were working there. I bought the deed at 1:00 a.m. from the owner who was heavily in debt to me. You are fired, by the way. So you are free to move in." "You are a monster," she breathed. "I'm efficient," he replied, his eyes flashing with something that looked dangerously like amusement. "Tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late, Cecilia." The next day, London exploded. The morning papers didn't carry the news yet, but the whispers had started. By the time Cecilia arrived at the servants' entrance of Blackwood House, refusing to use the front door out of habit, the staff was already buzzing. She was met by the housekeeper, Mrs. Galloway, a stern woman with a face like a dried apple. "The Duke is expecting you in the blue drawing-room," Mrs. Galloway said, her eyes scanning Cecilia's worn grey dress with open disapproval. "He has ordered a bath drawn for you immediately after." Cecilia held her head high. "Thank you, Mrs. Galloway." She was led through the house, a place of intimidating grandeur. Portraits of sterling ancestors stared down at her, men with cruel eyes and women with tight lips. She wondered if she would end up like them, trapped in a gilded frame, unhappy and cold. When she entered the blue drawing-room, Alistair was standing by the fireplace. But he wasn't alone. Sitting on the sofa sipping tea with the delicacy of a viper was a man Cecilia recognized instantly, a man she had hated for 3 years. Lord Amon. He was the man who had accused her father of theft, the man who had taken her family's estate. And now he was sitting in Alistair's drawing-room laughing. Cecilia stopped dead in the doorway. The colour drained from her face. Alistair looked up. He saw her reaction, saw the trembling of her hands. He didn't smile. He stepped forward, placing himself smoothly between Cecilia and Lord Amon. "Ah, Cecilia," Alistair said, his voice loud and warm, a fake warmth that sickened her. "You've arrived." Lord Amon turned. His beady eyes widened as they landed on her. He stood up slowly, setting his teacup down with a clatter. "Miss Vane, I thought you were... Surely you are not employed here." "She is not employed, Amon," Alistair said, walking over to Cecilia and wrapping a heavy arm around her waist. He pulled her flush against his side. His grip was iron, warning her not to pull away. "Cecilia is my guest, and my fiancée." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Lord Amon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Fiancé Duke, surely you jest. This woman is the daughter of a traitor. She is penniless. She is the future Duchess of Blackwood." Alistair cut him off, his voice dropping to that dangerous icy whisper. "And you will address her with the respect that title demands, or you will never set foot in any club in London again. Do I make myself clear?" Cecilia looked up at Alistair. For the first time, she saw something other than calculation in his face. She saw protection. It was an act she knew. It was part of the deal. But seeing Lord Amon turn pale, seeing the man who destroyed her life cower before Alistair gave her a rush of dark satisfaction she hadn't expected. "Of course, Your Grace," Amon stammered. "My apologies. I was just surprised." "Leave us," Alistair commanded. Amon scrambled to grab his hat and cane, shooting one last venomous look at Cecilia before hurrying out the door. As soon as the door clicked shut, Alistair released her. He stepped away immediately, as if touching her had burned him. "Why is he here?" Cecilia demanded, her voice shaking. "You associate with him." "Keep your friends close, and your enemies closer," Alistair said, walking back to the fireplace. "Amon is the one pushing for the Habsburg marriage. He wants me out of the country. He wants control of the trade routes I manage." "He framed my father," Cecilia said. "The letter you took from me proves it." Alistair turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. "I know." Cecilia blinked. You know." "I read the letter, Cecilia, before you stole it back." "Then why didn't you help us 3 years ago?" she cried out. "You could have saved him." "I didn't have the letter 3 years ago," Alistair said quietly. "I only found it in my father's archives last week. The old duke, my father, was working with Amon. They destroyed your father together." The room spun. Cecilia grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Your father? And Amon?" "Yes," Alistair said. "My legacy is built on the bones of your family, Cecilia. That is why I didn't have you arrested last night. That is why I offered you this deal." He walked toward her again, stopping just inches away. "I don't just want to avoid a marriage," Alistair admitted, his blue eyes burning with a sudden intense fire. "I want to destroy Lord Amon, and I want to dismantle my father's corrupt empire. But I cannot do it alone. I need someone who hates them as much as I do." He held out his hand again, just as he had in the ballroom. "I'm not just asking you to play a part, Cecilia. I'm asking you to help me burn them all to the ground. Are you in?" Cecilia looked at his hand. This wasn't just a charade anymore. It was revenge. She placed her hand in his. "I'm in." The following week was a blur of silk satin and pins. Alistair had not been exaggerating about his efficiency. He hired the most exclusive modiste in London, Madame Leclerc, and paid her triple her usual rate to work exclusively on Cecilia. For 3 days, Cecilia stood on a pedestal in the morning room, while seamstresses swarmed around her like bees. Alistair was often present, sitting in a wing-back chair, with a newspaper occasionally glancing up to offer a curt critique. "Too frilly," he remarked on a pink day dress. "She is a woman, not a confection. Darker colors, emerald sapphire, midnight blue. Colors that command attention, not beg for it." Cecilia, her mouth full of pins which she wasn't supposed to hold, but old habits from the factory died hard, glared at him. "I can speak for myself." "Not until you look the part," he replied without looking up from his paper. but there were moments when the mask slipped. On the third afternoon, Madame Leclerc draped a gown of heavy, crushed blue velvet over Cecilia. It was cut low, scandalously so, by the standards of a debutante, but perfect for a woman who was supposed to be a temptress. As Cecilia turned to look in the mirror, she caught Alistair staring. His newspaper lay forgotten on his lap. His gaze traced the line of her throat, the curve of her waist, and the sweep of the velvet train. For a second, the room felt devoid of air. The look in his eyes wasn't the calculating stare of a conspirator. It was the hungry, stunned look of a man seeing the sun after a long winter. He cleared his throat abruptly, standing up. "That will do. We attend the Wetherby Ball tonight." The Wetherby Ball was the first major event of the autumn season. It was the Lion's Den. When the Blackwood carriage arrived, the line of vehicles stretched down the block. Rain slicked the cobblestones, reflecting the gas lamps like spilled oil. Inside the carriage, Cecilia's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't clasp her bracelet. "Let me," Alistair said. He took her wrist. His fingers were warm, his touch surprisingly gentle. He fastened the diamond bracelet, a family heirloom worth more than the entire street she had lived on in Whitechapel. "Listen to me," he said, not letting go of her hand. "Tonight you are not Cecilia Vane, the disgraced daughter. You are the woman who brought the Duke of Blackwood to his knees. You hold the power. If they whisper, you laugh. If they stare, you stare back until they look away. Do not apologize for your existence." Cecilia looked into his pale blue eyes. "And if Lord Eamon is there, then we make him regret it." They entered the ballroom at the top of the grand staircase. The major domo slammed his staff against the floor. "His Grace the Duke of Blackwood," and "Miss Cecilia Vane." The silence was instantaneous. 300 heads turned. The orchestra faltered, missing a beat before recovering. The cut direct, the ultimate social snub, hung heavy in the air. Duchesses raised their fans to whisper behind them. Men adjusted their monocles, their eyes wide with shock. The Vane girl, the traitor's daughter, here with Blackwood. Cecilia felt the weight of their judgment like a physical blow. She wanted to shrink. She wanted to run. Then Alistair did something that wasn't in the script. He didn't just offer her his arm. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles in full view of the assembly. It was an intimate, possessive gesture that claimed her undeniably. "Shall we?" he murmured against her skin. He led her down the stairs, not rushing, forcing the crowd to part for them like the Red Sea. They walked straight to the center of the floor, just as a waltz began. "I don't know if I can do this," Cecilia whispered as he pulled her into the dance frame. His hand on her waist was firm, burning through the velvet of her dress. "Look at me," Alistair commanded. "Ignore them. There is no one in this room but us." They began to move. Cecilia was rusty. She hadn't danced in 3 years. But Alistair was a master. He led her with a strength that made it impossible to stumble. He swept her through the turns, spinning her until the faces of the judgmental crowd blurred into a smear of color. "They hate us," she said, catching a glare from a dowager countess. "Good." Alistair smirked, the expression making him look devastatingly handsome. "Let them hate. It means they are paying attention. The Habsburg ambassador is by the punch bowl. He looks like he's swallowed a lemon. The engagement will be dead by morning." "Is that all this is to you?" Cecilia asked, a sudden pang of hurt striking her chest. "A strategy." Alistair spun her again, pulling her closer than propriety allowed. His face was inches from hers. "It was a strategy, Cecilia. Strategy. Now, I am not so sure." The music swelled to a crescendo. For a moment, suspended in the turn, Cecilia forgot about the lie. She forgot about the money. She only felt the strength of his arms and the intensity of his gaze. She felt safe. As the music ended, they stopped, chests heaving slightly. Alistair didn't let go immediately. "Well done," he breathed. Before she could reply, a slow, mocking clap broke the spell. Lord Aemon emerged from the crowd, a glass of champagne in hand, a circle of sycophants trailing him. "A touching performance," Aemon sneered, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "Truly, to see the illustrious Duke of Blackwood dragging a gutter rat across the floor, it is a spectacle for the ages." The room went deathly quiet. Cecilia stiffened. This was it. The humiliation. Alistair released her waist and turned slowly to face Aemon. His face settled into the mask of the frost. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Careful, Aemon," Alistair said softly. "You are speaking of my future wife." "Wife?" Aemon laughed. "Come now, Sterling. We all know what this is. You picked up a stray to warm your bed. Tell me, Miss Vane, how much is he paying you, or are you doing it for the same rate you charge down at the docks?" The insinuation was vile. A collective gasp went through the room. Cecilia stepped forward before Alistair could move. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage, the kind of rage she had honed in the freezing nights of Whitechapel. She walked up to Lord Aemon until she was toe-to-toe with him. "You speak of gutters, my lord," Cecilia said, her voice ringing clear as a bell. "But you are the one standing in the filth of your own creation. My father died with his honor intact. You live with no honor at all. I would rather be a beggar with a clean soul than a king with blood on his hands." She picked up a full glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray. "And as for my rate—" She threw the wine into Aemon's face. The dark red liquid splashed over his pristine white shirt and expensive cravat, looking like a gruesome wound. "It is higher than you can afford." Lord Aemon spluttered, blinded and shocked. The crowd erupted into chaos. Alistair was at her side in an instant. He wasn't angry. He was grinning a genuine feral grin of triumph. He took her arm. "I think we've made our point, my dear," he said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the ballroom, leaving a stunned society and a wine-soaked villain in their wake. As they reached the carriage, the adrenaline crashed and Cecilia started to shake again. Alistair pulled her into the carriage and shouted for the driver to move. As soon as the doors closed, he grabbed her shoulders. "That," he said, his eyes blazing, "was the most magnificent thing I have ever seen." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a polite peck. It was a collision. He kissed her, with the force of the storm outside, hungry and desperate. Cecilia froze for a heartbeat, then melted, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. The line between the lie and the truth didn't just blur. It vanished. The kiss haunted Cecilia. The next morning, the sun streamed into her bedroom at Blackwood House, illuminating the silk sheets and the mahogany furniture. But Cecilia felt exposed. She sat up, touching her lips. It hadn't happened, she told herself. It was the adrenaline. It was the acting. Alistair Sterling didn't love. He acquired. He strategized. And she was just an acquisition. She dressed quickly in a navy morning gown and went downstairs. The house was quiet, but the tension was palpable. She found Alistair in the library. He was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. He didn't turn when she entered. "The Habsburgs have withdrawn the offer," he said, his voice flat. "The ambassador sent a note this morning. He was appalled by the display of vulgarity at the ball." "So's it worked," Cecilia said, halting near the door. "The deal is done." "Yes." Alistair turned finally. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. "You have fulfilled your end of the bargain. I have the money prepared, and your father's letter is on the desk." He gestured to the heavy oak desk. There sat a thick envelope of banknotes and the letter she had tried to steal that first night. Cecilia stared at them. This was what she wanted. Freedom. Vindication. She could take the money, go to Paris or Italy, and never worry about hunger again. But the thought of leaving made her chest ache. "You want me to leave today?" she asked softly. Alistair's jaw tightened. "It is what we agreed. Staying longer complicates things." "Because of the kiss?" she asked boldly. Alistair looked away. "Because Eamon will not stop at a glass of wine. He is a cornered rat now. He will come for you to get to me. I cannot protect you if you are here." "I can protect myself," Cecilia argued. "I proved that last night." "You have no idea what these men are capable of," Alistair snapped, slamming his hand against the window frame. The glass rattled. "They don't just ruin reputations, Cecilia. They arrange accidents. They burn down boarding houses. My father had a man killed because he wouldn't sell a piece of land. That is the blood that runs in my veins. That is the world you are playing in." He took a breath, composing himself. "Take the money. Go. Be safe." Cecilia walked to the desk. She reached for the letter. But before her fingers could touch it, the heavy double doors of the library burst open. Mrs. Galloway, the housekeeper, rushed in, looking pale. "Your Grace, I tried to stop them, but—" She was shoved aside by 2 uniformed police officers. Behind them walked a smug-looking man in a bowler hat, Inspector Thaddeus Grimshaw, known as Eamon's pocket watchdog, and behind him, limping slightly but wearing a triumphant sneer, was Lord Eamon. "Good morning, Duke," Eamon said, stepping into the room. "I trust we aren't interrupting a domestic dispute?" Alistair moved instantly, placing himself between the intruders and Cecilia. "Get out of my house, Eamon. Unless you have a warrant, this is trespassing." "Oh, I have a warrant," Inspector Grimshaw said, producing a folded paper. "But not for the house. For the lady." Cecilia's blood ran cold. "Me, Cecilia Vane," Grimshaw read. "You are under arrest for the theft of regimental funds, conspiracy to commit fraud, and—" he paused for dramatic effect— "the murder of Sergeant Thomas Miller." "Murder?" Cecilia gasped. "I don't even know a Sergeant Miller." "He was the clerk who discovered your father's embezzlement 3 years ago," Eamon said smoothly. "He was found dead in the Thames last night, but before he died he apparently wrote a confession. He claimed that he didn't find the embezzlement. He claimed he helped you and your father hide it, and that you silenced him to keep the secret." "That's a lie," Cecilia screamed. "My father was innocent." "You killed him. Evidence says otherwise." Eamon shrugged. "We found a locket belonging to you in the sergeant's pocket." He held up a small silver locket. Cecilia gasped. It was hers. It was the one she had pawned 2 years ago to pay for her mother's funeral. Eamon must have tracked it down and planted it. "Take her," Eamon ordered. The police stepped forward. "No!" Alistair roared. He lunged, grabbing the first officer by the collar and throwing him back. It was a shocking display of violence for a duke. He reached for a pistol mounted on the wall display. "Alistair, don't!" Cecilia cried out. If he drew a weapon on the police, he would hang. "Step away from the gun, your grace," Grimshaw warned, his hand drifting to his own truncheon. "Unless you want to join her in the cell." Alistair froze his hand inches from the antique revolver. He looked at Cecilia. He was the Duke of Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in England, and yet in this room with the law twisted against him, he was powerless. "It's a frame-up," Alistair growled. "You know it is." "Prove it in court," Eamon smiled, "although trials can take months, and Newgate Prison is so drafty this time of year. Many prisoners don't survive the wait." He was threatening to kill her in prison. Cecilia stepped forward, head high. "I will go." "Cecilia, no," Alistair said, his voice cracking. "I will go," she repeated, looking at Alistair. "Because I am innocent, and because I know you will find the truth." She held out her hands. The officer slapped the cold iron cuffs onto her wrists. "A touching faith," Eamon mocked. He walked up to Alistair, leaning in close, so only the Duke could hear. "This is checkmate Sterling. You want her back. You sign over the shipping lines to me. You destroy the evidence against my associates. You become your father's son again. Or the girl hangs." Eamon pulled back, adjusting his wine-stained coat. "Take her away." Cecilia was dragged out of the library. She looked back one last time to see Alistair standing amidst the ruin of his plans. He wasn't moving. He wasn't shouting. He was standing perfectly still, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. But his eyes were no longer those of a man playing a game. They were the eyes of a man who was about to burn the world down. As the police carriage rattled away, taking Cecilia toward the horrors of Newgate, Alistair turned back to the empty room. He walked to the desk, picked up the crystal decanter of whiskey, and hurled it into the fireplace. The alcohol hit the embers and exploded in a roar of blue and orange flame. "Mrs. Galloway!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. The housekeeper appeared, trembling. "Send a telegram to Paris," Alistair commanded, his voice devoid of humanity, cold as the grave. "To my brother. Tell him to come home. Tell him war has been declared." Newgate Prison was not a place. It was a sensory assault. It smelled of unwashed bodies, damp stone, and despair. Cecilia sat in the corner of a holding cell that was designed for 2, but currently held 6 women. The straw beneath her was mouldy. The only light came from a barred window high up on the wall, letting in a sliver of grey, smoggy daylight. She had been there for 3 days. Her velvet dress, once the envy of the ballroom, was now stained with grime. Her hair, so carefully pinned by Madame Leclerc, hung in tangled strands around her face. But it wasn't the filth that broke her spirit. It was the noise, the constant weeping of a girl in the corner who had stolen a loaf of bread, the raucous laughter of a gin-soaked matron who had murdered her husband. Cecilia hugged her knees to her chest. "This is how it ends," she thought, "just like father." The heavy iron door groaned open. A guard with a face like a bulldog stepped in, banging his truncheon against the bars. "Vain visitor." Cecilia scrambled to her feet, her legs numb. Is it the Duke?" the guard sneered. "Duke? A fancy bird like you doesn't get dukes in here. It's your lawyer, or so he says." Cecilia was led down a dripping corridor to a small interrogation room. There was a table and 2 chairs. Sitting in one of them was not a lawyer. It was Lord Amon. Cecilia stopped in the doorway, her breath catching. "I want to go back to my cell." "Sit down, Cecilia," Amon said pleasantly. He placed a clean white handkerchief on the table as if to protect his sleeve from the filth of the room. "You look dreadful. The accommodations are not to your liking, Suond. What do you want?" she spat, refusing to sit. "I am a practical man," Amon said, inspecting his fingernails. "I do not enjoy unnecessary waste. You are young, pretty in a sharp sort of way. It would be a waste to hang you." He slid a piece of paper across the table. Beside it, he placed a fountain pen. "Sign this." Cecilia stepped closer, reading the text upside down. It was a confession, but not just to the murder of the sergeant. It was a statement claiming that Alistair Stirling, the Duke of Blackwood, had masterminded the embezzlement scheme years ago and had ordered the hit on the sergeant to cover his tracks. "You want me to frame him?" Cecilia whispered, looking up at Amon with horror. "You want to destroy him?" "He stands in my way," Amon said, his voice hardening. "He is too powerful, too arrogant. But a scandal of this magnitude, a duke ordering a murder, he would be stripped of his titles. He would be ruined. And I would pick up the pieces of his empire for pennies on the pound. And if you sign the murder charges against you are dropped. You become the Crown's witness. You walk free. I will even give you passage to America." Cecilia looked at the pen. It was a lifeline. She could live. She could escape this hell. All she had to do was betray the man who had bought her out of poverty, the man who had danced with her when the world turned its back, the man who had kissed her with desperate passion. She looked at Amon. "You think everyone is for sale?" "Everyone is for sale, my dear. It's just a matter of price." Cecilia picked up the paper. She crumpled it into a ball and threw it in his face. "My father wasn't for sale," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "And neither am I. Get out!" Amon stood up slowly, brushing the paper from his lap. His face was purple with fury. "Have it your way," he snarled. "The trial is tomorrow. I have bought the judge. I have bought the jury. By sunset tomorrow, you will be sentenced to hang by the neck until dead, and I will make sure Alistair watches." Meanwhile, in the library of Blackwood House, Alistair was pacing a trench into the Persian rug. The room was filled with smoke from his cheroot, though he had barely taken a puff. The door opened, and a man walked in. He looked like Alistair, but if Alistair was a marble statue, this man was the rough-hewn rock before the chisel touched it. He had the same dark hair, but worn longer. He had the same blue eyes, but they were wilder, crinkled at the corners from squinting at the sun. He wore a leather duster coat that smelled of salt water and gunpowder. This was Dominic Stirling, the younger brother, the outcast, the man Alistair hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Nice place," Dominic drawled, kicking a mud-caked boot onto a velvet ottoman. "Still smells like repression and old money." "I don't have time for your wit, Dom," Alistair said, stopping his pacing. "I need your particular set of skills." "So I gathered from the telegram. War declared." "Very dramatic." Dominic poured himself a drink without asking. "You usually fight your wars with lawyers and banknotes. Why call me unless you need someone killed, or something stolen?" "Stolen," Alistair said. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Intriguing. What is the prize, the crown jewels?" "A ledger from Lord Amon's private safe." Dominic whistled low. "Amon. The Viper. His townhouse is a fortress, and his safe is likely a newer model. Milner or Chubb, hard to crack. Can you do it? For you know. Dominic took a sip of whiskey. You cut me off, remember, exiled me to the colonies because I embarrassed the family name. I sent you away because Eamon was going to have you arrested for that duel. Alistair shouted, his composure finally cracking. I saved your life. You controlled my life, Dominic shouted back. The two brothers stared at each other, the air crackling with years of unspoken resentment. Alistair took a deep breath. He walked over to the mantel and picked up a miniature portrait. It was a painting of Cecilia done just days ago by a visiting artist. Her name is Cecilia, Alistair said quietly. He framed her for murder. She hangs in 2 days if we don't find proof that Eamon cooked the books. The proof is in that safe. Dominic walked over and looked at the portrait. She's beautiful, and I assume she is not just a charity case. She is everything, Alistair admitted, his voice rough. If she dies, Dom, I burn this house down myself. I am done with the title. I am done with the legacy. I just want her back. Dominic looked at his brother. He had never seen Alistair like this. The frost had melted. Dominic sighed and downed his drink. Well, I always did hate Eamon, and I've been itching to break into a Milner safe. He clapped Alistair on the shoulder. Get me the floor plans, and a crowbar. We have a heist to plan. The Old Bailey was packed. It was the trial of the decade. The fallen debutante accused of murder. The gallery was filled with society rubberneckers, journalists with pencils poised, and commoners who smelled blood in the water. Cecilia stood in the dock. She had been allowed to wash, but she refused the fresh dress Eamon had mockingly sent her. She wore her stained velvet gown, a symbol of her fall. She stood straight, her hands gripping the wooden railing, her face pale but compsed. The prosecutor, a man named Mr. Finch, who had a voice like grinding glass, was putting on a show. She is a temptress, Finch bellowed, pointing a bony finger at Cecilia. A woman of low morals who seduced her way into the Duke's home, and when the brave Sergeant Miller threatened to expose her family's past crimes. She killed him in cold blood. He produced the silver locket. We found this on the body, her mother's locket. The crowd gasped. Cecilia looked at the jury. 12 men. They looked bored. Some looked sleepy. She knew with a sinking heart that Eamon had paid them all. Does the defense have any witnesses? The judge asked. He was a red-faced man who kept glancing at his pocket watch, clearly anxious to get to his lunch. Alistair's lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Thigpen, stood up. My lord, we are waiting for a key piece of evidence. We do not wait for miracles in this court, the judge snapped. If you have no witnesses, we move to closing arguments. I am a witness. The doors of the courtroom banged open. Alistair Sterling strode in. He was dressed not in his usual dark suits, but in the full formal regalia of a duke, complete with the sash of the Order of the Garter. He looked like a king coming to claim his kingdom. The crowd parted instinctively. Your Grace, the judge stammered, clearly intimidated despite his bribes. You wish to testify. I wish to speak the truth, Alistair said. He walked to the witness box, his eyes locking with Cecilia's. He gave her a microscopic nod. Hold on. Alistair took the oath. He turned to the jury. Cecilia Vane was with me on the night of the murder. Alistair lied smoothly. From midnight until dawn. Objection, Finch shrieked. The Duke is biased. He is her fiancé. I am a peer of the realm. Alistair roared, his voice silencing the room. And I tell you she is innocent. The man who killed Sergeant Miller is the man who paid for this prosecution, Lord Eamon." He pointed at the gallery where Eamon sat looking smug. "That is slander." Eamon stood up. "Arrest him. Order, order." The judge banged his gavel. "Your Grace, unless you have proof. The proof is coming." Alistair said, his eyes darting to the clock on the wall. "Where are you, Dominic?" "Across the city." Dominic Sterling was currently hanging upside down from a rope 3 stories above the pavement. He was dangling outside the window of Lord Eamon's study. The glass was cut. He swung himself inside, landing silently on the carpet. "Easy peasy," he muttered. He went to the painting of Eamon's ancestor above the fireplace. He swung it aside. There was the safe. A Chubb detector lock. Nasty business. Dominic pulled out a stethoscope and a set of fine picks. He pressed the stethoscope to the steel door, turning the dial with agonizing slowness. Click, click. "Come on, you old rusty bucket," Dominic whispered. Outside, he heard heavy footsteps. The guards. He had timed their rotation, but they were early. Click, thunk. The handle turned. Dominic swung the heavy door open. It was packed with ledgers. He grabbed the ones marked 1881, 1884, regimental accounts. He flipped one open. There it was. Eamon's signature authorizing the transfer of funds to a private account in Switzerland, and a note in the margin's frame vein, if inquiry begins. "Got you," Dominic grinned. The door handle to the study rattled. "Did you hear that?" A guard's voice came through the wood. Dominic shoved the ledger into his satchel. He ran to the window. The door burst open. 2 guards with pistols rushed in. "Hey!" one shouted. Dominic tipped his hat. "Gentlemen!" He dove out the window just as a bullet shattered the frame where his head had been. He slid down the rope, burning his hands, and landed in the alleyway where a horse was waiting. He vaulted onto the saddle and kicked the horse into a gallop. To the Old Bailey move. Back in the courtroom, time had run out. "The jury has deliberated," the foreman announced. They hadn't even left the box. "We find the defendant, Cecilia Vane, guilty of murder." Cecilia closed her eyes. A single tear escaped. "No," Alistair shouted. He vaulted the railing of the witness box, rushing toward the dock. 2 bailiffs grabbed him, but he threw them off like rag dolls. He reached Cecilia, gripping her hands through the bars. "I won't let them take you," he vowed. "It's over, Alistair," she whispered. The judge put on a black cap, the symbol of a death sentence. "Cecilia Vane, you are hereby sentenced to be taken from this place to a place of lawful execution, and there be hanged by the neck until you are dead." Bang! The double doors of the courtroom didn't just open. They were kicked in. Dominic Sterling stood there, chest heaving, covered in soot, waving a leather-bound book in the air. "I object," Dominic yelled, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Who is this madman?" the judge demanded. "I am Dominic Sterling," he panted, walking down the aisle. "And I have the reading material you've been looking for." He slammed the ledger onto the prosecutor's table. "Read it," Dominic commanded. "Page 54, Eamon's handwriting, confessing to the embezzlement. And look at the date on the last entry. 3 days ago. Payment to Thug for Miller disposal. Signed, Eamon." The courtroom erupted. Journalists were scrambling over benches to see the book. Finch, the prosecutor, looked at the ledger, his face turning pale grey. He looked up at the judge. "My lord, this appears to be genuine." Lord Eamon in the gallery tried to slip away toward the exit. "Stop that part, man!" Alistair shouted, pointing a finger at his enemy. Two burly members of the public, caught up in the mob mentality, tackled Eamon before he could reach the door. The judge looked at the ledger, then at the rioting crowd, then at the Duke of Blackwood, who looked ready to tear the building apart, brick by brick. He realized the tide had turned. Self-preservation kicked in. "The verdict is set aside." The judge banged his gavel. "Bailiffs seize Lord Eamon Misvane. You are released immediately." The guard unlocked the dock. Cecilia didn't walk out. She fell out, her knees giving way. Alistair was there. He caught her before she hit the floor. He scooped her up into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I have you," he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "I have you, Cecilia. You're safe." Cecilia clung to him, sobbing into his sash. Over Alistair's shoulder, she saw Dominic leaning against a pillar, winking at her. "Let's go home," Alistair said, lifting her high. He carried her down the center aisle, past the cheering crowd, past the screaming Eamon, who was being handcuffed, and out into the cool, clean air of London. But the story wasn't quite over. The danger had passed, but the truth of their hearts, the lie that had become real, still had to be faced. 3 days after the trial, Blackwood House was peaceful for the first time in a century. Lord Eamon was in the Tower of London, awaiting his own trial, and Dominic had finally stopped drinking all the vintage brandy, having accepted the position of estate manager. But in the master suite, Cecilia was packing. Her meagre belongings and the few new dresses Alistair had insisted she keep were neatly folded in a trunk. The contract was fulfilled. She had the money. She was free. She clicked the latch of the trunk shut and turned around, only to find Alistair standing in the doorway. He looked devastatingly weary, but his eyes were clear. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice tight. "The deal is done, Alistair," Cecilia said, though the words tasted like ash. "You have your reputation back. I have my freedom." We agreed. Alistair walked into the room. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her, blocking her path to the door. "We agreed to a business arrangement," he said softly. "But you and I both know that contract burned up the moment you walked into the ballroom." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out money. He pulled out the silver locket, her mother's locket that the police had returned. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "You came into my house to steal a letter," Alistair whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. "But you are the most skilled thief I have ever met, Cecilia, because without me even noticing, you stole my heart right out of my chest." Cecilia looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm just a seamstress, Alistair. You are a duke." "I'm a man who was lost in the dark until you broke a window and let the light in," he countered. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the gasp Cecilia let out. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to the palm. "I don't want a fake fiancé anymore. I want the real thing. I want the woman who throws wine at villains and saves my soul. Marry me, Cecilia. Not for a deal, but because I love you." Cecilia looked at the trunk, then down at the man who had risked everything for her. The choice was the easiest she had ever made. "I'm keeping the money, though," she joked through her tears. Alistair laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Keep it all. Just keep me." "Yes," she whispered, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes." And that is the story of Cecilia and Alistair. It started with a break-in at midnight and ended with a love that brought down a corrupt empire. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we think are mistakes, like a thief in the night, are actually destiny knocking at the door. They proved that your past doesn't define you. It's what you're willing to fight for that matters. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the fog-covered streets of Victorian London. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were Cecilia, would you have forgiven Alistair for his family's past? Or would you have taken the money and run? Let me know down below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a heart-pounding Wild West romance coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.